Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. For today's episode, I'm sure that there are a lot of you out there that are familiar with Winnie the Pooh, which originally started out as a series of stories written back in the 1920s by British author A. Milne. And much like Garfield, as I've mentioned previously in my Garfield and Friends review, it became popular once Winnie the Pooh was adapted by Disney back in the mid-1960s, even though this was around the time that Walt Disney himself ended up dying before his vision of an animated adaptation of Winnie the Pooh could be completed. But anyway, enough beating around the bush. In the 1980s, Disney would go on to produce an animated series featuring the silly old bear and his friends in all new adventures, first airing on the Disney Channel for a little while before airing on ABC in 1988. That show is none other than The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. The show came to be following the success of the animated Winnie the Pooh featurettes, and especially after The Mini Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which was a compilation film of the first three featurettes, which were Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, and Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. The fourth featurette, Winnie the Pooh and a Day for Eeyore, was released in 1983, several years after the film was released. That same year, they made a live-action Pooh series called Welcome to Pooh Corner, which featured the characters played by people in costumes. But we're not here to talk about that series. We're actually talking about The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh itself. As mentioned before, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh first premiered on the Disney Channel in 1988. Then after that, it also aired as a regular part of ABC's Saturday morning lineup. I remember my brother and I watching the show a lot back when I was just 1 year old, to the point that my mom would record quite a number of episodes off of TV onto 2 VHS tapes. Anyway, the show was successful enough to last for 4 seasons, airing from January 1988 to October 1991. However, this was not the only Disney animated series to feature a bear as a main character, because around the time that the show was starting its second season, Adventures of the Gummy Bears had moved from NBC to ABC to air as an hour-long block with The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, becoming known as the Gummy Bears Winnie the Pooh Hour. Though confidentially, around that time, I actually preferred Winnie the Pooh over Gummy Bears back then. Not to mention that this was actually part of the genesis of Disney's television animation division during the 1980s, paving the way with such animated series as The Wuzzles, Gummy Bears, Fluffy Dogs, DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, and this show. However, in the case of Fluffy Dogs, it was slated to become an animated series, but it ended up not coming to fruition due to the fact that it aired on ABC during the Thanksgiving weekend back in 1986. But back to Winnie the Pooh, the show was actually a fun little romp, bringing back all of the familiar characters from the stories in the animated featurettes, such as Pooh Bear himself, Piglet, Tigger, Rabbit, Owl, Eeyore, Kanga and her son Roo, Christopher Robin, and Gopher, even though that last character wasn't in the original A. Milne stories, instead being made for Disney's fare. Each of the characters are portrayed exactly as they were depicted in the stories and the animated featurettes. Pooh Bear is the laid-back, easygoing, unintelligent, yet friendly and helpful bear, albeit with an endless appetite for honey. Piglet, Pooh's best friend, is the self-described very small animal, who is prone to getting scared very easily, but when push comes to shove will find the courage to help his friends when they need it. Tigger is the most excitable and scatterbrained one of the bunch, with a love of bouncing, even though that can get him into trouble most of the time, especially when Rabbit is concerned. Rabbit is the pompous and stuck-up control freak who has an obsession with gardening and protecting his garden, though even in spite of this, he can still prove to be helpful and friendly to Pooh and the others. Eeyore is the gloomy old donkey who always sees the worst in every situation, even though he does have a soft spot for his friends. Owl is the wise old philosopher who prides himself on being the most intelligent in all of the 100-Acre Wood, though in actuality he's more of a pompous blowhard. Kanga is the gentle and motherly one, especially to her son Roo, who is friendly and excitable and loves bouncing just as much as Tigger does. Gopher is a little bit of a workaholic who specializes in digging tunnels, and especially in using dynamite and other explosives, even if he can get a little bit careless when doing so. And last but not least, Christopher Robin is the young boy who serves as a good friend to Pooh Bear and the others, especially being very good friends with Pooh himself. Not only do all of the familiar characters from the stories and featurettes return for this series, but in a near similar vein to that as Garfield and Friends, the show also expands on the world of Pooh Bear and his friends. While the original featurettes, compilation film, and Welcome to Pooh Corner focus on the world taking place within a storybook, this show abandons the storybook concept altogether and just has the characters living in their own world. Although, at least later Pooh media, starting with 2000's The Tigger movie, actually go back to using the storybook concept like the previous animated features did. Aside from that, also like Garfield and Friends, the show also includes characters that were made for the show, such as Stan Woozle and Hef Heffalump, who aim to steal honey from Pooh Bear and his friends for themselves, the Pack Rats, who often steal things from other people and leave walnuts behind in their place, Christopher Robin's mother, whose face is never seen, sort of like Nanny from the original Muppet Babies series, and Kessie, a young bluebird who gets adopted by Rabbit. In fact, Kessie is the only one of these characters made for the show who got brought back and included as a recurring character in the Book of Pooh. There are a few other characters that were made for the show, but if I tried to list them all, this review would last longer than necessary. Another thing I really like about the show is the fact that it has a lot of aesthetics to it, not just from the backgrounds, but from the plots of the episodes as well. A lot of the plots of the episodes are very inventive. For example, there's an episode where Pooh Bear tries to fly after being inspired from flying Christopher Robin's kite and seeks to achieve that dream with Eeyore's help, despite Rabbit, Tigger, and Piglet trying to stop him from doing so. That one was especially funny in the sense that the latter three took the phrase breaking the law of gravity a bit too literally after Owl mentioned that phrase to them. There's also an episode where Tigger befriends a termite that's been causing trouble around the 100-acre wood, another where Eeyore tries to act like Tigger in an attempt to be more well-liked by the others, and lots more. It's these little plots and concepts that make the show very entertaining and educational in its own right, especially for a lot of people that grew up with the Pooh franchise, such as myself. In fact, the show was so popular that even after it ended its run in 1991, it still continued to air in reruns as a part of ABC's Saturday morning schedule, even well into the Disney's One Saturday Morning years. Not only that, but after that, more shows based on Winnie the Pooh would soon follow, such as the Book of Pooh as I mentioned earlier, My Friends Tigger and Pooh, and even that upcoming new Playdate with Winnie the Pooh series. Because the show holds quite a special place in my heart, I will give it 8 stars. I think it's safe to say that the Winnie the Pooh franchise has a pretty good legacy, what with all the different forms of media that have been featuring the silly old bear throughout the years ever since its inception from back in the mid to late 1960s. However, in spite of its popularity with its animated featurettes, feature films, TV series, and astonishing amount of merchandise, I can't believe that they actually had the nerve to make that Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey movie as a horror-filled take on the lovable Bear of Very Little Brain, kind of similar to what happened with the Banana Splits when they turned that show into a horror film as well. All I can say is, I really hope that this doesn't start turning into a trend, what with taking kids' shows of decades past and turning them into horror films. That's the last thing that anyone needs. I mean, it's bad enough that they had to make feature films of old live-action shows without looking over the source material first, like what happened with I Spy, Bewitched, Starsky and Hutch, Land of the Lost, and even Chips. But to turn kids' shows into horror films, that's another thing entirely. But anyway, I shouldn't complain about that anymore. At least Pooh Bear still has a pretty good fan base, and I think a lot of people still like Winnie the Pooh for what he is. So that about does it for this episode of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. Be sure to stay tuned to my YouTube channel for the next episode or whatever video I might come up with next. So until next time, later!